The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of the Mojave Desert as Marcus Thompson checked his GPS coordinates one final time. The former Navy SEAL adjusted his tactical vest and squinted against the blazing heat that shimmered off the desert floor like liquid mercury. At 42 years old, Marcus had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless dangerous missions, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold in this seemingly endless wasteland of sand and rock. Marcus worked as a private security contractor now, a job that paid well, but came with its own unique risks. His current assignment seemed straightforward enough. Escort a wealthy businessman named Vincent Carrera through a remote section of the desert to reach a private mining operation. The job paid $20,000 for what should have been a simple 2-day journey. Marcus needed the money badly. His daughter Sarah was starting college in the fall, and the medical bills from his ex-wife cancer treatment had drained most of his savings. Vincent Carrera was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who wore expensive clothes that looked completely out of place in the desert environment. He claimed to be a mineral rights investor looking to survey potential mining sites. Something about the man made Marcus uneasy, but he pushed those feelings aside. After 20 years in the military and private security, Marcus had learned to trust his instincts, but he also knew that sometimes paranoia could be just as dangerous as carelessness. The plan was simple. They would drive deep into the desert using 2 vehicles, Marcus in his modified Jeep Wrangler and Carrera following in a luxury SUV with 2 of his associates, Tony and Rick. The destination was an abandoned mining facility about 60 miles from the nearest paved road. They would spend one night camping under the stars, then return the following evening. Marcus had packed enough water, food, and supplies for a week, just to be safe. In the desert, preparation could mean the difference between life and death. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, the landscape became increasingly desolate. The few scattered Joshua trees gave way to nothing but bare rock formations and endless stretches of sand. The temperature gauge on Marcus's dashboard read 115 degrees, and it was only 2 in the afternoon. The air conditioning in his Jeep worked overtime, but Marcus could still feel the oppressive heat seeping through the windows. After 3 hours of driving on increasingly rough terrain, they stopped to check their position. Marcus climbed out of his Jeep, immediately feeling the furnace-like heat hit him like a physical wall. The silence was profound. No birds, no insects, just the faint whisper of wind across the sand. Carrera emerged from his SUV looking pale and uncomfortable despite the air conditioning. "How much further?" Carrera asked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Marcus consulted his map and GPS about 20 more miles. "The terrain gets rougher from here, so we'll need to take it slow." He noticed that Tony and Rick, Carrera's associates, remained in their vehicle. Both men were large and muscular with the kind of build that suggested they were more than just business partners. Their sunglasses and tactical clothing made them look more like bodyguards or enforcers. As they continued their journey, Marcus's unease grew stronger. Carrera had been evasive about the exact nature of his business, and his associates had barely spoken since they'd started the trip. The whole situation felt wrong, but Marcus had committed to the job, and his military training had taught him to complete missions regardless of personal discomfort. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they finally reached the abandoned mining facility. The site consisted of a few weathered buildings, rusted equipment, and several deep shafts that disappeared into darkness. It was exactly the kind of place where people could disappear without a trace. Marcus parked his Jeep near what had once been the main office building and got out to survey the area. "This is it," Carrera said, but his tone had changed. Gone was the nervous businessman persona, replaced by something colder and more calculating. Tony, Rick, secure the perimeter. The 2 men jumped out of the SUV with military precision, their hands moving to concealed weapons. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. His right hand dropped to the Glock pistol on his hip, while his left reached for the tactical knife strapped to his vest. Something was very wrong. "What's going on, Carrera?" Marcus demanded, his voice calm but commanding. Years of combat experience had taught him to stay cool under pressure. Carrera smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm afraid this isn't about mining rights, Mr. Thompson. You see, you've become a liability to certain people. People who don't appreciate Navy SEALs asking too many questions about their operations." Marcus's mind raced as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. 6 months ago, he had witnessed something during a security job in Afghanistan. A weapons deal involving American military equipment being sold to insurgent groups. He had reported it through proper channels, but apparently those channels led straight back to the people involved in the corruption. They had tracked him down and hired him for this job as a way to eliminate him permanently. "You made a mistake bringing me out here," Marcus said, his hand still on his weapon. "I'm not some desk jockey you can intimidate." "Oh, we're not going to kill you," Carrera laughed. "That would be too easy to trace back to us. No, we're going to leave you here, all alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no water, no food, and no way to call for help. The desert will do our work for us." Tony and Rick had positioned themselves on either side of Marcus, their weapons now visible. These weren't amateurs. They moved with the confidence of experienced killers. Marcus calculated his options. He could probably take one of them, maybe two if he was lucky, but not all three. And even if he won the fight, he would still be stranded in the middle of the desert with damaged vehicles and limited supplies. "Your weapon," Rick demanded, a scar running down the left side of his face. Slowly, Marcus had no choice but to comply. He drew his pistol carefully and placed it on the ground, then kicked it away. Tony moved forward and picked it up while Rick kept his own gun trained on Marcus's chest. "Now your knife, your radio, and your satellite phone," Carrera ordered. One by one, Marcus surrendered his equipment. These men had done their homework. They knew exactly what gear a professional like Marcus would carry. They even demanded his backup knife and the emergency beacon he kept hidden in his boot. "Your water," Tony said next. This was the cruelest blow. In the desert, water was life itself. Marcus watched helplessly as they poured out every drop of water from his Jeep, the precious liquid disappearing into the thirsty sand. They also took his food supplies, his first aid kit, and anything else that might help him survive. "You military types always think you're so tough," Carrera said as his men prepared to leave. "Let's see how tough you are when the sun rises tomorrow and you realize no one is coming to save you." They disabled Marcus's Jeep by shooting holes in the radiator and cutting the fuel lines. Black smoke poured from under the hood as the engine died with a grinding noise. The SUV's engine roared to life, and within minutes, Marcus was alone in the vast emptiness of the desert. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood motionless for several minutes, listening to the fading sound of the SUV's engine until it disappeared completely. Then there was nothing but the whisper of wind and the distant call of a hawk circling high overhead. Marcus forced himself to think logically despite the rage and fear coursing through his veins. Panic was the enemy of survival. His SEAL training had taught him that the mind was the most important survival tool. He needed to assess his situation honestly and make a plan. The facts were grim. He was approximately 60 miles from the nearest road, in an area where no one would think to look for him. The temperature was still over 100 degrees, and it would remain dangerously hot until well after sunset. He had no water, no food, no communication devices, and no transportation. The nearest known water source was probably 30 miles away. But Marcus also had advantages that Carrera and his men had underestimated. 20 years of military training had taught him skills that most people didn't possess. He knew how to find water in unlikely places, how to signal for help using improvised methods, and how to survive in hostile environments. More importantly, he had survived worse situations before. During his second tour in Afghanistan, Marcus and his team had been trapped behind enemy lines for 5 days with minimal supplies. They had survived by using every survival technique in their training manual, and some they invented on the spot. That experience had taught him that the human body could endure incredible hardship when the mind remained focused and determined. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Marcus knew he had to use the remaining daylight wisely. Once darkness fell, the temperature would drop dramatically, possibly reaching near freezing levels. The desert was a place of extremes, blazing heat during the day and bitter cold at night. Marcus began by searching the abandoned mining facility thoroughly. The buildings were mostly empty, but he found several items that could be useful. A rusty metal container that could hold water if he found any. A length of copper wire that could be used for signaling. Several pieces of broken glass that could start a fire if positioned correctly in sunlight. An old tarpaulin that was torn but still large enough to provide some shelter. He also found something that gave him hope. Tracks leading away from the mining site in a different direction from where Carrera's SUV had departed. The tracks were old, probably weeks or months, but they suggested that other vehicles occasionally visited this area. If he could follow those tracks, they might lead him to a road or another facility. As the sun touched the horizon, Marcus made a difficult decision. He could try to walk out during the night when the temperature was cooler, or he could wait until morning and try to survive another day in the hope that someone might come looking for him. Both options carried enormous risks. Walking at night would be easier on his body, but navigating in darkness without proper equipment would be extremely dangerous. The desert was full of hidden ravines, poisonous snakes, and unstable ground that could cause serious injuries. On the other hand, staying put meant enduring another day of killing heat without water. Marcus decided on a compromise. He would prepare a signal fire using materials from the mining site, then rest during the worst heat of the following day, and begin walking in the late afternoon. This would give him the best chance of being spotted, while also conserving his energy for the journey ahead. As darkness fell across the desert, Marcus gathered dried wood and debris from around the abandoned buildings. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared, and within an hour he was grateful for the warmth of his small fire. The flames danced against the star-filled sky, creating a tiny island of light in the vast darkness. Marcus allowed himself to think about his daughter Sarah for the first time since being abandoned. She was supposed to start her freshman year at Stanford in 6 weeks. All her life, she had looked up to her father as someone who could handle any situation, who would always come home no matter what dangers he faced. The thought of her learning that he had died alone in the desert was unbearable. He thought about his ex-wife Jennifer too. Despite their divorce, they had remained friends, united in their love for their daughter. Jennifer was still fighting her battle with cancer, and she needed Marcus to be there to help support Sarah through college and beyond. Giving up was not an option. The desert night was filled with sounds that most people never heard. The distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures moving through the sparse vegetation, the whisper of wind through rock formations. But it was also beautiful in its own harsh way. The stars were brighter here than anywhere Marcus had ever seen, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. Marcus dozed fitfully by his fire, waking every hour or so to add more fuel. He had learned in Afghanistan that small fires were better than large ones. They conserved fuel and were less likely to be spotted by enemies. Of course, in this situation, being spotted might be exactly what he needed. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of the sunrise was almost enough to make Marcus forget his desperate situation. Almost. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature began to rise again. Marcus knew he had perhaps 2 hours before the heat became unbearable. He used this time to improve his situation as much as possible. He moved the largest pieces of sheet metal he could find to create a makeshift shelter near his fire site. The metal would reflect heat during the day and hold warmth during the night. He also arranged rocks to spell out "Help" in letters 20 feet long, pointing an arrow toward his shelter. By mid-morning, the temperature was already approaching 100 degrees. Marcus crawled into his improvised shelter and tried to rest. The metal was hot to the touch, but it provided blessed shade from the direct sunlight. He forced himself to remain motionless, conserving every drop of moisture in his body. This was when the real mental battle began. Alone with his thoughts under the blazing sun, Marcus fought against despair and panic. His mouth was already dry, and he could feel the beginning signs of dehydration. His military training told him that he could survive 3 days without water in temperate conditions, but in this heat, that time was cut dramatically. Marcus used a meditation technique he had learned from a Buddhist monk during a mission in Thailand. He focused on his breathing, slowing his heart rate, and calming his mind. Panic used energy and water, both of which he desperately needed to conserve. As the hours passed, Marcus began to experience the early stages of heat exhaustion. His head throbbed, and waves of nausea washed over him. He knew these were dangerous signs, but he also knew there was nothing he could do except endure and wait for the sun to begin its descent. Around 3 in the afternoon, when the heat was at its most brutal, Marcus heard something that made his heart race with hope. The distant sound of an aircraft engine. He crawled out of his shelter, ignoring the blast of heat that hit him like opening an oven door. There, high overhead, was a small plane heading roughly southwest. Marcus grabbed the piece of mirror he had salvaged from his Jeep and angled it to catch the sunlight. The reflected beam danced across the desert floor as he tried to aim it at the aircraft. Flash, 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 the universal distress signal. The plane continued on its course, showing no sign of having seen his signal. But the sight of that aircraft filled Marcus with renewed determination. If one plane had passed overhead, others might follow. He was not as alone as Carrera had believed. The key was to be ready when the next opportunity presented itself. As the sun finally began its descent toward the western horizon, Marcus prepared for the most important decision of his ordeal. Should he attempt to walk out, or should he continue to wait for rescue? His military experience told him that staying in one place was usually the best strategy when lost, but this situation was different. No one knew where he was, and no search parties would be looking for him here. Marcus made his choice. He would begin walking at sunset, following the old tire tracks he had found earlier. If those tracks led to a road or another facility, he might have a chance. If they led nowhere, at least he would die trying to save himself rather than waiting helplessly for death to find him. As the sun touched the horizon once again, Marcus gathered the few items that might be useful for his journey. The piece of mirror for signaling, a sharp piece of metal that could serve as a knife, the copper wire for snares if he encountered any small animals. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Before leaving, Marcus took one last look around the mining site that had been his prison for the past 24 hours. In the fading light, it looked even more desolate and forbidding than when he had first arrived. But it had also taught him something important about himself. Even in the most desperate circumstances, he had not given up. His SEAL training ran deeper than his enemies had realized. Marcus began walking into the gathering darkness, following the faint tire tracks that represented his only hope of survival. Behind him, his signal fire continued to burn, a lonely beacon in the vast emptiness of the desert. Ahead lay unknown dangers and uncertain hope, but Marcus Thompson was no longer waiting to die. He was fighting to live. The desert at night was a completely different world from the furnace Marcus had endured during the day. As he followed the faint tire tracks through the darkness, the temperature had dropped to a blessed 70 degrees, but he knew this relief would be temporary. In a few hours, the mercury might plummet another 30 degrees, turning his sweat-soaked clothing into a frigid burden that could steal precious body heat. Marcus had been walking for 3 hours now, using the stars as his compass. His SEAL training in land navigation had taught him to read the night sky like a road map, and the North Star provided a constant reference point. The tire tracks he followed were barely visible in the moonlight, sometimes disappearing entirely over rocky ground, forcing him to search carefully until he picked them up again. His throat felt like sandpaper, and his lips had already begun to crack. The human body lost water constantly through breathing and sweating, and Marcus knew he was operating on borrowed time. In the military, they had drilled the rule of threes into every soldier. 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. But in this heat, the water timeline was compressed to perhaps 36 hours at most. The landscape around him was an alien world of strange rock formations and scattered desert plants. Barrel cacti dotted the terrain like sentinels, their bloated forms storing precious water that Marcus knew how to extract if necessary. But cutting into a barrel cactus would require tools he didn't possess, and the liquid inside was often more acidic than helpful. For now, he would continue following the tracks and hope they led to civilization. Around midnight, Marcus encountered his first serious obstacle. The tire tracks led directly to the edge of a steep ravine that cut across the desert floor like a wound. The opposite side was perhaps 50 feet away, but the ravine itself plunged into darkness. Marcus couldn't see the bottom, and he had no way of knowing how deep it might be. He spent 20 minutes exploring both directions along the rim, looking for a safe way across. To the north, the ravine seemed to get wider. To the south, it appeared to narrow, but the moonlight wasn't sufficient to reveal details. Marcus made the difficult decision to descend into the ravine and climb out the other side, despite the obvious dangers. The descent was treacherous. Loose rocks shifted under his feet, and twice he nearly lost his footing completely. The sound of falling stones echoed off the canyon walls, and Marcus winced each time, knowing that any serious injury would mean certain death. He had no backup, no rescue team, no medical support. Every step had to be calculated and deliberate. At the bottom of the ravine, Marcus made a discovery that renewed his hope. A small trickle of water ran along the canyon floor, probably fed by an underground spring somewhere upstream. It wasn't much, barely enough to wet his fingers, but it was the first water he had seen since being abandoned. Marcus knew he had to be extremely careful. Desert water sources could be contaminated with bacteria, parasites, or mineral concentrations that would cause severe illness. But he also knew that dehydration would kill him much faster than any waterborne disease. He cupped his hands and collected what little water he could, maybe half an ounce, and drank it slowly, savoring each precious drop. The taste was bitter and metallic, but Marcus had drunk much worse during his military service. He followed the tiny stream upstream for about 100 yards, hoping to find a larger pool, but the trickle eventually disappeared into the rocky ground. Still, this discovery told him something important. There was groundwater in this area, which meant the possibility of finding more substantial sources. Climbing out of the ravine on the far side proved even more challenging than the descent. The rock face was nearly vertical in places, and Marcus had to use every technique he had learned during mountain warfare training. His hand was soon cut and bleeding from gripping sharp rocks, but he pushed through the pain. In survival situations, minor injuries had to be ignored in favor of a larger goal. By the time Marcus reached the top of the far side, he was breathing heavily and his heart was racing. The brief water had helped, but his body was still operating under severe stress. He forced himself to rest for 10 minutes, using breathing exercises to slow his heart rate and conserve energy. The tire tracks continued on the other side of the ravine, but they were even fainter now. Marcus realized that whoever had made these tracks had crossed the ravine at a different point, probably using some kind of bridge or ford that he had missed in the darkness. This meant he was no longer following the exact route, but he hoped he was still heading in the general direction of civilization. As dawn approached, Marcus faced another critical decision. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, which meant the punishing heat would return within a few hours. He could continue walking and try to cover more distance while he still had strength, or he could find shelter and wait out the worst of the day's heat. Marcus chose to keep moving. His water situation was so desperate that every hour counted. If he could find a road, a building, or another water source during the cooler morning hours, It might mean the difference between life and death. He pushed forward as the sky gradually brightened, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. The sunrise revealed just how vast and empty his surroundings truly were. In every direction, the landscape stretched endlessly, rolling hills of sand and rock, interrupted only by occasional mesas and the distant purple outline of mountains. Marcus felt like an ant crawling across an infinite tabletop, completely insignificant against the overwhelming scale of the desert. But the daylight also revealed something else. About 2 miles ahead, Marcus could see what looked like a dirt road cutting across the desert floor. His heart leaped with hope. Roads meant vehicles, and vehicles meant people. Even if the road was rarely used, it represented his best chance of being rescued. Marcus forced his tired legs to move faster, fighting against the growing heat and his body's desperate need for water. The sun climbed higher with each passing minute, and he could feel the familiar weight of oppressive heat beginning to settle over the desert. Time was running out. As he drew closer to the road, Marcus could see that it was indeed a dirt track, marked by tire ruts and the occasional piece of litter left by passing vehicles. The road appeared to run roughly east-west, and Marcus had to decide which direction offered the best hope. To the west, the road disappeared into empty desert. To the east, it seemed to head toward a range of low hills. Marcus chose east, reasoning that hills might indicate higher elevation and possibly water sources. He also noticed that the tire tracks in the road were relatively fresh, probably no more than a few days old. This meant the road was still in use, even if only occasionally. Walking on the road was easier than navigating cross-country, but it also meant Marcus was completely exposed to the sun. The temperature was rising rapidly now, probably approaching 90 degrees already, and Marcus could feel sweat beginning to evaporate from his skin almost as quickly as his body produced it. After an hour of walking on the road, Marcus spotted something that made his pulse quicken. In the distance, heat waves shimmered around what looked like a structure, possibly a building or a large vehicle. Marcus picked up his pace, hope giving him a burst of energy despite his exhaustion. As he drew closer, the mirage resolved into reality. It was indeed a building, a small concrete structure that looked like it might be a utility station or water pumping facility. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, and Marcus could see a small parking area with tire tracks indicating recent use. The building was locked, but Marcus noticed a water spigot attached to the outside wall. His hands trembling with anticipation, he turned the handle. Nothing happened for several seconds, then suddenly water gushed out, beautiful, clear, life-giving water. Marcus didn't hesitate. He put his mouth directly under the flowing water and drank deeply, the cold liquid shocking his parched throat and stomach. He drank until his stomach hurt, then forced himself to stop. Too much water too quickly could cause painful cramps or even vomiting, which would waste precious fluid. After his initial thirst was satisfied, Marcus splashed water over his head and face, washing away the grime and salt from his ordeal. The sensation was indescribable, like being reborn. He soaked his shirt completely, knowing that the evaporating water would help cool his body during the heat of the day. Marcus also took the opportunity to examine his physical condition. His hands were cut and scraped from climbing out of the ravine. His lips were cracked, and his face was sunburned despite his attempts to stay in shade. He had lost significant weight already. His belt could be tightened another notch, and his clothing hung loose on his frame. But most importantly, he was alive, and he had found water. This discovery changed everything. With access to water, Marcus could survive for weeks if necessary. He could also use this location as a base camp, venturing out during cooler periods to search for help or signal for rescue. Marcus spent an hour at the water station, drinking regularly and allowing his body to rehydrate properly. He also searched around the building for anything that might be useful. In a small storage shed that was unlocked, he found some basic tools, a roll of duct tape, and a plastic tarp. Not much, but Every item could be valuable in the right situation. He also found something even more important, a maintenance log sheet that showed when technicians visited the facility. According to the log, someone came to check the equipment every 2 weeks, and the last entry was dated 9 days ago. This meant another visit was due within the next few days. Marcus made a strategic decision. Rather than continuing his desperate walk through the desert, he would stay near the water station and prepare a comprehensive rescue signal. If the maintenance crew arrived on schedule, he would be rescued. If they didn't come, or if he missed them somehow, he would at least be in much better condition to continue his journey. Using the tools from the shed and materials he had gathered during his trek, Marcus began constructing an elaborate signal that would be visible from both air and ground. He arranged rocks to spell out "Help" in letters 30 feet long. Then, used the reflective surface of the water tank to create a more sophisticated mirror system for signaling aircraft. He also prepared multiple contingency plans. If rescue didn't come the next few days, he would follow the road east toward the hills, stopping at the water station each evening to rehydrate. If he encountered other structures along the way, he would leave signs indicating his direction of travel. The heat of the day was becoming unbearable again, so Marcus retreated into the small amount of shade provided by the building. He used the plastic tarp to create additional shade and settled in to wait. For the first time since being abandoned, he felt genuine optimism about his chances of survival. As he rested in the shade, Marcus allowed his mind to process what had happened to him. The betrayal still stung, but he was beginning to understand the bigger picture. The weapons deal he had witnessed in Afghanistan was apparently part of a larger criminal operation, and his report had threatened powerful people who were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Marcus realized that even if he survived this ordeal, his problems would not be over. The people who had tried to kill him would still be out there, and they would not appreciate his unexpected survival. He would need to be very careful about how he handled the situation once he reached safety. But those were problems for the future. Right now, his only concern was staying alive and finding his way back to civilization. The water station had given him a new lease on life, but he was still far from safety. According to his rough calculations, he was probably still 30 to 40 miles from any major road or town. As the afternoon heat reached its peak, Marcus dozed fitfully in his improvised shelter. He woke several times to drink more water and check his surroundings, but no vehicles had passed on the road. The silence was profound, just the whisper of hot wind and the occasional buzz of insects. Around 4 in the afternoon, when the sun was still blazing but had begun its descent toward the western horizon, Marcus heard something that made his heart race. The distant sound of a vehicle engine, growing gradually louder. Someone was coming down the road. Marcus scrambled out of his shelter and ran toward the road, waving his arms and shouting at the top of his lungs. In the distance, he could see a cloud of dust approaching from the east. As it grew closer, Marcus could make out the shape of a pickup truck, probably a maintenance vehicle based on the equipment racks mounted on its sides. The truck slowed as it approached the water station, and Marcus could see the surprised face of the driver through the windshield. The vehicle came to a stop about 50 feet away, and a middle-aged man in work clothes got out cautiously. "Holy hell," the man said, staring at Marcus. "What are you doing out here, buddy? You look like you've been through a meat grinder." Marcus tried to speak, but his voice came out as a hoarse croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I need help. I've been stranded out here for 2 days." The maintenance worker, whose name tag read Joe, looked around the empty desert with amazement. "Stranded? Where's your vehicle? How did you get way out here?" Marcus realized he needed to be very careful about how much he revealed. If Joe was an innocent maintenance worker, the full truth might put the man in danger. On the other hand, Marcus needed help, and he couldn't afford to seem crazy or unreliable. "My vehicle broke down about 20 miles from here," Marcus said, which was technically true. "I've been walking for days trying to find help. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and I know something about desert survival, but I was reaching my limits when I found this water station. Joe's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. Navy SEAL? Well, that explains how you survived out there. Most people will be dead by now. He walked over to his truck and retrieved a bottle of sports drink from a cooler. Here, drink this. The electrolytes will help. Marcus accepted the bottle gratefully and drank slowly. The sweet liquid tasted like ambrosia after days of nothing but metallic-tasting water. I need to get to a phone, he said. I need to call my family and let them know I'm alive. Sure thing, Joe said. How about a satellite phone in the truck? Emergency calls only, but this sure qualifies. He handed Marcus a ruggedized satellite phone, the kind used by remote work crews. Marcus dialed his daughter's number with shaking hands. The phone rang 3 times before Sarah answered. Hello. Her voice sounded worried, which meant she had probably been expecting bad news. Sarah, it's Dad. I am okay. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, Sarah began crying. Dad, where are you? We've been so worried. Your employer called and said you never checked in from your assignment. Mom has been calling hospitals and police departments for 2 days. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Carrera and his people had apparently told Marcus's agency that he had simply disappeared, probably hoping that a brief search would be conducted and then abandoned when no trace was found. They hadn't counted on his family being so persistent in looking for him. I'm safe now, Marcus told his daughter. I had some vehicle trouble in the desert, but I'm with a good Samaritan who's going to help me get back to town. I'll call you again in a few hours with more details. Dad, I love you, Sarah said, her voice still shaky with emotion. I love you too, sweetheart. Tell your mom I'm okay and that I'll be home soon. Marcus ended the call and handed the phone back to Joe. Thank you, he said simply. You just saved my life. Joe grinned. Well, you did most of the work yourself. Not many people could have made it this far on foot in this heat. Want to tell me what really happened out there? Marcus considered his options. Joe seemed like a decent man, but involving him in a larger conspiracy could be dangerous. On the other hand, Marcus owed him an explanation, and Joe might be able to provide information about the area that could prove useful. The truth is, I was betrayed by the people who hired me, Marcus said carefully. They brought me out here under false pretenses and then abandoned me to die. I don't know if they're still in the area or not, which is why I'm being cautious. Joe's expression grew serious. You're talking about some kind of criminal activity. Yes, Marcus said, and these are dangerous people. If you help me, you could be putting yourself at risk. Joe was quiet for a moment, then he shrugged. I spent 4 years in the Marines before I got into maintenance work. I've dealt with dangerous people before. He gestured toward his truck. Come on, let's get you out of here. I know a place where you can clean up and figure out your next move. As Marcus climbed into the passenger seat of Joe's truck, he felt the first real sense of safety he had experienced since being abandoned. The air conditioning felt wonderful against his sunburned skin, and the simple act of sitting in a moving vehicle represented a return to civilization. But even as they drove away from the water station, Marcus knew his ordeal was far from over. Carrera and his associates were still out there, and they would not be pleased to learn that their intended victim had survived. Marcus would need to be very careful about his next moves, because now the hunt would begin in earnest. OE's pickup truck rumbled down the desert road, carrying Marcus away from the water station that had saved his life. The air conditioning felt like a miracle against Marcus's sunburned skin, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax slightly. But his military training kept him alert, constantly scanning the road ahead and behind for any signs of Carrera's people. There's a small town called Desert Springs about 40 miles east of here, Joe explained as he navigated around a particularly deep rut in the road. It's not much, maybe 300 people, a gas station, a diner, and a motel. But it's got a sheriff's station and a clinic. Sounds like you could use both. Marcus nodded, grateful for Joe's straightforward help. The maintenance worker hadn't asked too many questions, seeming to understand that Marcus was in serious trouble and needed assistance, not an interrogation. How long have you been working in this area? Marcus asked. About 15 years, Joe replied. I maintain water pumps and utility stations for the county. Most of them are pretty remote, which means I know these back roads better than just about anybody. He glanced at Marcus with curiosity. In all that time, you're the first person I've ever found stranded on foot out here. Most folks who get into trouble in the desert don't survive long enough to be rescued. The comment reminded Marcus of just how close he had come to death. Without his SEAL training and the lucky discovery of the water station, he would have become another statistic, another person who simply vanished in the vast emptiness of the desert. Carrera and his associates had chosen their execution method well, assuming that the harsh environment would eliminate their problem while leaving no evidence of murder. As they drove, Marcus studied the landscape with new eyes. Now that he wasn't fighting for survival, he could appreciate the stark beauty of the desert. The late afternoon sun painted the rocks and sand in shades of gold and red, and the distant mountains looked like purple shadows against the sky. It was beautiful, but it was also deadly to anyone unprepared for its harsh realities. After an hour of driving, they crested a small hill and saw a desert spring spread out below them. Joe hadn't exaggerated when he called it small. The town consisted of perhaps 24 buildings clustered around a single main street, with a few outlying houses scattered among the Joshua trees. But to Marcus, it looked like a metropolis after his ordeal in the wilderness. Joe drove directly to the sheriff's station, a modest single-story building with a small parking area and a flagpole flying both the American flag and the Nevada state flag. Sheriff Martinez is good people, Joe explained as he parked the truck. She'll know how to handle whatever trouble you're in. Marcus climbed out of the truck, his legs still shaky from exhaustion and dehydration. The simple act of walking on pavement felt strange after days of navigating rough desert terrain. Joe led him through the front door of the sheriff's station, where a middle-aged Hispanic woman in a khaki uniform looked up from behind a desk covered with paperwork. Joe, what brings you to town? Sheriff Martinez asked, then noticed Marcus, and her expression grew concerned. Who's your friend? He looks like he's been through a war zone. This is Marcus Thompson, Joe explained. I found him at the utility station on County Road 47. He's been stranded in the desert for 2 days. Sheriff Martinez stood up and gestured toward a chair. Please sit down, Mr. Thompson. You look like you need medical attention. She turned to Joe. Thanks for bringing him in. Can you give us some privacy? Joe nodded and headed toward the door. I'll be at the diner if you need me, he told Marcus. Take care of yourself. Once they were alone, Sheriff Martinez poured a glass of water from a cooler and handed it to Marcus. Now, then, why don't you tell me what happened out there? And don't leave anything out. I've been sheriffing in this county for 12 years, and I've seen just about everything. Marcus made a quick decision to trust Sheriff Martinez with most of the truth. Her manner was professional but compassionate, and Joe's recommendation carried weight. Marcus also realized that he would need law enforcement help to deal with Carrera and his associates. I'm a private security contractor, Marcus began, former Navy SEAL. 3 days ago, I was hired to escort a man named Vincent Carrera to a remote mining site. It turned out to be a setup. Carrera and 2 associates brought me to an abandoned mine, took my weapons and supplies, destroyed my vehicle, and left me to die in the desert. Sheriff Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. That's attempted murder. Do you know why they wanted you dead? Marcus explained about the weapons deal he had witnessed in Afghanistan and reported through military channels. As he spoke, he watched Martinez's face carefully for any sign that she might be connected to Carrera's operation, but he saw only professional concern and growing anger. So, these people try to kill you because you reported illegal arms trafficking, Martinez summarized when Marcus finished his account. And they chose the desert as their murder weapon because it would look like an accident. She shook her head in disgust. I've seen what the desert does to people who aren't prepared for it. Leaving someone out there without water is as cruel as anything I can imagine. The question now is what to do next, Marcus said. These people think I'm dead, which gives me a temporary advantage. But once they realize I survived, they'll come after me again. And they might target my family to get to me." Martinez nodded grimly. "First things first, we need to get you checked out by the doctor and get some food into you. Then, we'll figure out how to handle this situation." She picked up her radio. "Doc Hernandez, this is Sheriff Martinez. I'm bringing someone over to the clinic. Emergency situation." The clinic was a small building adjacent to the sheriff's station, staffed by a single doctor who served the entire county. Dr. Hernandez was a compact man in his 60s with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner. He examined Marcus thoroughly, checking his blood pressure, listening to his heart and lungs, and testing his reflexes. "You're dehydrated, exhausted, and you got some minor cuts and abrasions, but nothing life-threatening," the doctor concluded. "Your body temperature is still slightly elevated, and you've lost at least 15 pounds, probably more." "How long did you say you were out there?" "About 60 hours total," Marcus replied. "The last day and a half without any water at all." Dr. Hernandez shook his head in amazement. "Most people would have died from heat stroke in half that time. Your military training probably saved your life." He prepared in 4-bag. "I'm going to give you some fluids and electrolytes. You'll need to take it easy for the next few days while your body recovers." While the 4-drip restored precious fluids to Marcus's system, Sheriff Martinez used her computer to run background checks on Vincent Carrera and his associates. What she found was disturbing, but not surprising. "Carrera has a long criminal history," she reported. "Multiple arrests for fraud, weapons charges, and conspiracy. No convictions, though. Apparently, he's good at staying just outside the law or has good lawyers." The two men with him, Tony Ricci and Rick Vasquez, both have record for assault and weapons violations. "Any current warrants?" Marcus asked. "Nothing active, but there are several ongoing investigations. FBI, ATF, even Interpol is interested in some of Carrera's international activities." Martinez leaned back in her chair. "These are serious players, Marcus. The kind of people who have resources and connections." Marcus absorbed this information while the four slowly restored his strength. The situation was even more complex than he had realized. Carrera wasn't just a criminal trying to cover up a single weapons deal. He was apparently part of a larger criminal organization with international reach. "I need to contact my family," Marcus said. "If these people realize I'm alive, they might target my daughter or my ex-wife." "Already thought of that," Martinez replied. "I've contacted the FBI field office in Las Vegas. They're sending an agent out to interview you, and they're also arranging protection for your family. This kind of case falls under federal jurisdiction anyway, especially with the international arms trafficking angle." The FBI agent, a serious woman named Special Agent Patricia Wong, arrived in Desert Springs just as the sun was setting. She listened to Marcus's account of events with professional intensity, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about dates, locations, and the specific individuals involved. "We've been tracking Carrera's organization for 2 years," Agent Wong explained after Marcus finished his statement. "Your witness testimony about the weapons deal in Afghanistan could be the key to bringing down the entire operation. But first, we need to keep you alive long enough to testify." "What about my family?" Marcus asked. "Already handled," Wong assured him. "We have agents with your daughter at Stanford, and your ex-wife has been moved to a safe house. As far as anyone knows, you're still missing and presumed dead in the desert." This news brought Marcus tremendous relief, but it also highlighted the gravity of his situation. The fact that the FBI was taking such extensive precautions meant that Carrera's organization posed a real and immediate threat. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked. Agent Wong outlined the strategy. Marcus would remain in protective custody in Desert Springs while the FBI built their case against Carrera. The remote location of the town made it an ideal safe house, and Sheriff Martinez had agreed to coordinate local security. Meanwhile, FBI investigators would gather evidence related to the weapons trafficking operation and prepare for arrests. "How long before you can move against them?" Marcus wanted to know. "If everything goes according to plan, We should be able to execute warrants within a week, Wong replied. But these investigations can be unpredictable. It might take longer if we encounter complications. That evening, Marcus checked into the Desert Springs Motel, a modest establishment with a dozen rooms and a friendly elderly proprietor named Mrs. Chun who asked no questions about her unusual guest. Sheriff Martinez had arranged for plainclothes deputies to maintain surveillance on the motel, and Agent Wong had provided Marcus with a secure satellite phone for emergency communication. For the first time in days, Marcus had access to a real shower, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed. The simple pleasure of hot water washing away the grime and salt of his desert ordeal was almost overwhelming. As he stood under the spray, Marcus allowed himself to fully process what he had survived. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed something important about himself. Even in the most desperate circumstances, stripped of weapons, equipment, and support, he had found a way to survive. His SEAL training had been crucial, but it was his refusal to give up that had ultimately saved him. Marcus also realized that his ordeal in the desert had changed him in fundamental ways. The experience of facing death alone in the wilderness had stripped away many of the comfortable assumptions that most people lived with. He had looked directly into the face of mortality and emerged with a deeper appreciation for life and a clearer understanding of what truly mattered. That night, Marcus called his daughter from the secure phone. Sarah cried when she heard his voice, relief mixing with anger at the people who had tried to hurt her father. "I want to come see you," she said through her tears. "I know, sweetheart, but it's not safe right now," Marcus replied. "The FBI agents with you will explain everything. This will all be over soon, and then we'll have a long talk about what happened." "Dad, I was so scared," Sarah admitted. "When they said you were missing in the desert, I thought you weren't coming home this time." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I promised you a long time ago that I would always come home," he said softly. "Sometimes it just takes longer than expected." After ending the call, Marcus lay on the motel bed and stared at the ceiling. Through the window, he could see the vast star field that had guided him during his desperate walk through the desert. The same stars that had seemed so cold and distant during his ordeal now looked like old friends watching over him. Marcus thought about the choices he had made that led to this situation. Reporting the weapons deal had been the right thing to do, even though it had nearly cost him his life. His military oath had been to protect and defend the Constitution, and that obligation didn't end when he left the service. But he also thought about the price his family was paying for his integrity. Sarah should be preparing for college, not hiding under FBI protection. Jennifer should be focusing on her cancer treatment, not worrying about assassins targeting her ex-husband. The ripple effects of corruption and criminality spread far beyond the immediate participants. On his second night in Desert Springs, Marcus was awakened by the sound of vehicles approaching the motel. Through his window, he could see headlights turning into the parking lot. Two vehicles moving slowly and deliberately. Marcus's survival instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed the secure phone and called Sheriff Martinez. "There are vehicles outside my motel," Marcus whispered. "Could be nothing, but it doesn't feel right." "Stay on the line," Martinez replied. "I'm dispatching units now." Marcus moved away from the window and positioned himself where he could see outside while remaining concealed. The vehicles had parked across the street from the motel, and dark figures were moving between them. These weren't late-arriving guests or lost travelers. "Marcus, this is Deputy Johnson," a voice came over the phone. "We've got the motel surrounded. Stay in your room and stay low." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The figures across the street suddenly opened fire on the motel with automatic weapons, shattering windows and punching holes through the thin walls. Marcus dropped to the floor as bullets whined over his head, feeling remarkably calm despite the chaos. His SEAL training had prepared him for situations exactly like this. The gunfire was answered immediately by the deputies surrounding the motel. Muzzle flashes lit up the desert night as a fierce gun battle erupted between Carrera's assassins and the local law enforcement officers. Marcus crawled to the bathroom, the most defensible position in the room, and waited for the shooting to stop. The battle lasted perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt like hours to Marcus. When the gunfire finally ceased, he could hear Sheriff Martinez shouting orders to her deputies and calling for medical assistance. One of the attacking vehicles had burst into flames, and the acrid smell of burning gasoline drifted through the night air. "Marcus, you okay in there?" Deputy Johnson called from outside his room. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, emerging from the bathroom. "What's the situation?" "Two suspects down. One escaped on foot into the desert," Martinez reported as she entered the motel room. "No casualties on our side, though it was close. These guys came prepared for war." Marcus examined the damage to his room. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, and the window had been completely shot out. If he had been standing near the window when the attack started, he would have been killed instantly. "How did they find me?" Marcus wondered aloud. Agent Wong arrived within an hour, accompanied by a team of federal investigators. Her preliminary assessment was sobering. "Carrera's organization has more resources than we realized," she admitted. "They somehow tracked you to Desert Springs, despite our security precautions." The escaped gunman was captured the next morning by FBI agents using tracking dogs and thermal imaging equipment. The man turned out to be Rick Vasquez, one of Carrera's original associates from the desert abandonment. Under interrogation, he revealed that the organization had sources within federal law enforcement who had leaked information about Marcus's location. This revelation forced a major change in strategy. Marcus could no longer remain in Desert Springs, and the FBI's protective custody arrangements had been compromised. Agent Wong made the difficult decision to move Marcus to a completely secure location while her team worked to identify and neutralize the corruption within their ranks. "We're moving you to a federal safe house in Colorado," Wong explained. "Maximum security, completely isolated, with only a handful of people knowing the location. You'll be safe there while we finish building our case." As Marcus prepared to leave Desert Springs, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 3 days ago, he had been dying in the desert, abandoned by enemies who thought they had found the perfect murder weapon. Now he was at the center of a major federal investigation, with trained assassins hunting him and his family under government protection. But Marcus also felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life since leaving the military. His survival and testimony could help bring down a dangerous criminal organization that was trafficking weapons and endangering national security. The same sense of duty that had led him to report the weapons deal in Afghanistan now compelled him to see this fight through to the end. Regardless of the personal cost, the federal safe house in Colorado was hidden deep in the Rocky Mountains, accessible only by a single winding road that switchbacked through dense pine forests. Marcus arrived there in the middle of the night, transported in an armored vehicle with blackened windows and a 4-agent escort. The facility itself looked like a modest mountain lodge from the outside, but Marcus quickly discovered it was equipped with sophisticated security systems and communication equipment. Special Agent Patricia Wong had accompanied Marcus to the safe house, along with a team of federal marshals who would provide round-the-clock protection. The isolation was both comforting and unsettling. Marcus felt safe from immediate threats, but he also felt cut off from the world and helpless to protect his family directly. "Your daughter and ex-wife are secure," Agent Wong assured him during their first briefing at the safe house. "Sarah is at a protected location near Stanford, and Jennifer is receiving her cancer treatment at a private medical facility with full security coverage. They're safe, but they're also scared and frustrated about being separated from you." Marcus nodded, understanding the difficult position his family was in. "How long will this arrangement need to continue?" "That depends on how quickly we can build an airtight case against Carrera's organization," Wong replied. "The good news is that the attack in Desert Springs gave us valuable intelligence. We captured 2 of Carrera's operatives, and they're providing information about the organization's structure and operations." Agent Wong spread several photographs across the table between them. Marcus recognized Vincent Carrera, Tony Ricci, and Rick Vasquez, but there were also pictures of people he had never seen before, men and women in business suits who looked nothing like the thugs who had abandoned him in the desert. "This is bigger than we initially realized," Wong explained. "Carrera's organization has tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, government contracts, and even some military procurement operations. They've been using their legitimate front companies to facilitate weapons trafficking on a massive scale." Marcus studied the photographs with growing concern. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering, involving dozens of people and millions of dollars in illegal transactions. His testimony about the weapons deal in Afghanistan was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. "What's my role in all this?" Marcus asked. "You're our key witness," Wong replied. "Your first-hand account of the weapons transfer in Afghanistan provides the foundation for our case. But we also need you to help us understand the operational details, how the transactions were conducted, who was involved, what security measures were in place." Over the following days, Marcus worked closely with FBI analysts and investigators to reconstruct every detail of the Afghan weapons deal he had witnessed. The process was exhausting, requiring him to relive traumatic memories while focusing on minute details that could prove crucial in court. Marcus learned that the weapons he had seen being transferred were part of a larger pattern of military equipment being diverted from official channels and sold to insurgent groups, criminal organizations, and even foreign governments. The profits from these sales were being laundered through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. "The financial aspects are particularly complex," explained Agent David Shun, the FBI's forensic accountant on the case. "Carrera's people have been very sophisticated about hiding their money trails. They use cryptocurrency, offshore banking, real estate investments, and legitimate business purchases to obscure the source of their funds." Marcus was impressed by the thoroughness of the FBI investigation, but he was also frustrated by the slow pace of legal proceedings. Every day that passed was another day his family remained separated and in danger. He found himself thinking constantly about Sarah's college plans and Jennifer's medical treatment, both of which were being disrupted by the security concerns. On his fifth day at the safe house, Marcus received disturbing news from Agent Wong. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Carrera's organization had been planning additional attacks, not just against Marcus, but against other potential witnesses and even some of the FBI agents working the case. "We found detailed surveillance files on your family, including photographs taken outside your daughter's dormitory and your ex-wife's medical appointments," Wong reported grimly. "These people are playing for keeps, and they're willing to target innocent civilians to protect their operation." This revelation filled Marcus with cold rage. It was one thing to target him. He was a trained operative who understood the risks of his profession. But threatening his family crossed a line that Marcus would not tolerate. He made a decision that surprised Agent Wong. "I want to help you draw them out," Marcus said firmly. "Use me as bait." Wong shook her head immediately. "That's not how protective custody works, Marcus. Our job is to keep you safe until you can testify, not to put you in harm's way." "But that's exactly the problem," Marcus argued. "As long as Carrera thinks I'm hiding somewhere under government protection, he'll keep targeting my family and your agents. We need to give him a reason to come after me directly, on terms we can control." The debate continued for hours, with Wong and her supervisors ultimately rejecting Marcus's proposal as too dangerous. But Marcus had spent too many years as a SEAL to accept a purely passive role in his own protection. That night, while the federal marshals assumed he was sleeping, Marcus used skills learned in military escape and evasion training to slip away from the safe house undetected. Marcus had memorized the location during his arrival and had been carefully observing the security protocols used by his protectors. The marshals were competent professionals, but they were guarding against external threats, not expecting their protectee to voluntarily leave the secure facility. Using survival techniques from his SEAL training, Marcus made his way through the dense forest surrounding the safe house, moving silently through the darkness. His goal was to reach the nearest town, about 15 miles away, where he could access communication and transportation without being traced through official channels. The mountain terrain was challenging, but nothing compared to the desert ordeal Marcus had recently survived. The cool air and abundant water sources made this journey almost pleasant in comparison. Marcus moved steadily through the night, using the stars for navigation and avoiding the main road where search teams would likely focus their efforts. By dawn, Marcus had reached the outskirts of a small mountain town called Pine Ridge. He approached cautiously, knowing that Agent Wong would have alerted all local law enforcement to watch for him. But Marcus also knew that small towns in rural Colorado often had residents who prefer to handle their business without government involvement. Marcus found what he was looking for at a truck stop on the edge of town. An independent trucker named Bill Martinez who was willing to give Marcus a ride in exchange for cash payment and no questions asked. Marcus had taken several $100s from the Safe House Emergency Fund, knowing he would need untraceable currency for his plan. "You're not running from the law, are you?" Bill asked as Marcus climbed into the cab of his 18-wheeler. "No, Marcus replied honestly. I'm running toward it." The truck carried Marcus eastward across Colorado and into Kansas, putting distance between himself and the federal agents who were undoubtedly searching for him. Marcus used the travel time to refine his plan and make necessary preparations using a prepaid cell phone he had purchased at the truck stop. Marcus's strategy was based on a simple premise. Carrera's organization would continue hunting him regardless of federal protection. So the only way to end the threat permanently was to force a direct confrontation on his own terms. But first, he needed to gather intelligence about Carrera's current location and operational capabilities. Marcus contacted several former military colleagues who worked in private security and intelligence gathering. Using carefully coded language, he was able to learn that Carrera had been spotted in Las Vegas, apparently coordinating the search for Marcus from a luxury hotel suite. The criminal organization was indeed planning additional attacks, including a possible attempt to kidnap Sarah to use as leverage. This information confirmed Marcus's worst fears and validated his decision to take independent action. The federal investigation might eventually succeed in prosecuting Carrera, but Marcus's family would remain in danger until the man was either captured or killed. Marcus arrived in Las Vegas after 2 days of travel, using a combination of truckers, bus transportation, and ride-sharing services to avoid creating a traceable path. He checked into a modest motel using false identification documents obtained through contacts in the veteran community who specialized in helping former military personnel disappear when necessary. Las Vegas was the perfect environment for Marcus's plan. The city's transient population, abundant surveillance cameras, and complex urban geography provided both opportunities and challenges for anyone conducting covert operations. Marcus spent his first day in the city conducting reconnaissance, identifying Carrera's location, and studying the security arrangements around his hotel. Carrera was staying in a penthouse suite at the Bellagio, protected by a team of private security guards and surrounded by the hotel's own extensive security systems. Getting to him would require careful planning and precise execution, but Marcus had infiltrated much better defended targets during his military career. Marcus also learned that Tony Ricci, the surviving member of Carrera's original desert team, was coordinating street-level operations from a different location. Ricci was reportedly furious about Marcus's survival and was personally leading the hunt for both Marcus and his family members. On his second night in Las Vegas, Marcus made contact with Agent Wong using a secure communication method that couldn't be easily traced. Wong was predictably angry about Marcus's escape from protective custody, but she was also professionally curious about his intelligence gathering. "You're going to get yourself killed," Wong told him over the encrypted phone connection, "and probably compromise our entire investigation in the process." "Your investigation is already compromised," Marcus replied. Carrera knows every move you're making because he has sources inside federal law enforcement. The only way to end this is to take him down outside the normal channels. Marcus proposed a modified version of his original plan. Instead of acting completely independently, he would coordinate with Agent Wong to ensure that any action against Carrera could be legally justified and properly documented. This would protect the federal investigation while allowing Marcus to neutralize the immediate threat to his family. After extensive consultation with her superiors, Wong agreed to a limited cooperation arrangement. The FBI would provide Marcus with intelligence support and emergency backup, but they would maintain plausible deniability about his operations. If Marcus was captured or killed, the government would disavow any knowledge of his activities. This is completely off the books, Wong warned him. If something goes wrong, you're on your own. Marcus accepted these terms without hesitation. His family's safety was worth any personal risk, and he had always been more comfortable operating independently than within large bureaucratic organizations. The plan Marcus developed was elegantly simple. He would approach Carrera's organization not as a fugitive trying to hide, but as a former SEAL looking to sell information about federal investigation efforts. This would give him access to Carrera while providing a plausible reason for the meeting. Marcus reached out to known associates of Carrera's organization through intermediaries, offering to provide details about FBI surveillance techniques, safe house locations, and planned operations in exchange for a substantial payment and guaranteed safety for his family. The offer was designed to be irresistible to Carrera, who was desperately seeking intelligence about federal activities. The response came within 24 hours. Carrera was interested in the proposition and willing to meet, but only under strict security conditions at a location of his choosing. Marcus expected these precautions and had already prepared contingency plans for several different scenarios. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening at a warehouse complex on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Marcus would come alone and unarmed, supposedly to demonstrate good faith. In reality, Marcus had no intention of arriving defenseless, but he would need to be extremely careful about concealing weapons and surveillance equipment from Carrera's security team. As Marcus prepared for what could be his final confrontation with the people who had tried to kill him in the desert, he thought about the long chain of events that had brought him to this point. His decision to report the weapons deal in Afghanistan had seemed like a simple matter of military duty at the time. Now it had evolved into a complex web involving organized crime, government corruption, and personal vengeance. But Marcus felt no regret about his choices. Every step along the way had been guided by the same principles that had motivated him throughout his military career: protect the innocent, serve the greater good, and never abandon a fellow warrior. His family was depending on him to end this threat, and Marcus would not let them down. The warehouse meeting would determine whether Marcus's desperate gamble paid off or whether he would join the ranks of those who had underestimated Vincent Carrera's ruthlessness. But Marcus had survived the desert when no one thought it was possible, and he had learned that sometimes the most dangerous situations could be turned into opportunities for those brave enough to seize them. The warehouse district on the outskirts of Las Vegas was a maze of industrial buildings and empty lots, perfect territory for clandestine operations. Marcus arrived at the designated meeting location 30 minutes early, using the extra time to conduct a thorough reconnaissance of the area. His military training had taught him that preparation and situational awareness could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The warehouse Carrera had chosen was a concrete and steel structure surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Several luxury vehicles were parked in the lot, indicating that Carrera had brought significant backup for this meeting. Marcus counted at least 6 guards positioned around the perimeter, all armed and alert. These weren't street thugs. They moved with the professional competence of former military or law enforcement personnel. Marcus had come to this meeting with a simple plan: get close enough to Carrera to gather evidence of his criminal activities while simultaneously positioning federal agents for a coordinated takedown. Agent Wong and her team were positioned in the area, ready to move when Marcus gave the signal through a concealed transmitter. But Marcus also carried a backup plan, because his experience in the desert had taught him that situations could change rapidly, and sometimes violence was the only solution to impossible problems. Concealed in various locations on his body were several weapons that had passed through Carrera's security screening. A ceramic knife taped to his back, a small pistol hidden in a specially modified boot heel, and a compact explosive device disguised as a cell phone battery. As Marcus approached the warehouse entrance, he was immediately surrounded by Carrera's security team. The pat-down was thorough, but not quite thorough enough to find all of Marcus's hidden equipment. His SEAL training in concealment and improvised weapons had prepared him for exactly this situation. "He's clean," reported the lead security guard, a tall man with military bearing who reminded Marcus of several Special Forces operators he had known during his service. Marcus was escorted through the warehouse to a makeshift office area where Vincent Carrera waited with Tony Ricci and several other men Marcus didn't recognize. Carrera looked older than he had during their desert encounter, as if the stress of being hunted by federal investigators was taking a physical toll. "The famous Marcus Thompson," Carrera said with a cold smile. "I have to admit, I'm impressed that you survived our little desert excursion. Most people would have died within the first day." "Most people aren't Navy SEALs," Marcus replied calmly. "You made a mistake underestimating what I could endure." "Perhaps," Carrera agreed. "But now you're here, which suggests that you've reconsidered your position regarding cooperation with federal authorities. Tony tells me you have information to sell." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation carefully, knowing that he needed to sound convincing while avoiding any statements that could compromise the actual FBI investigation. "The feds think they're closing in on your operation, but they're actually months away from having enough evidence for prosecutions. Their surveillance techniques are primitive, and they have no idea about the scope of your organization." This was partially true. Agent Wong had admitted that the investigation was more complex than originally anticipated, and that building a comprehensive case could take considerably longer than initially planned. Marcus was simply emphasizing the challenges while downplaying the progress that had already been made. "And what exactly are you offering to sell?" Ricci interjected suspiciously. "How do we know this isn't some kind of setup?" Marcus had anticipated this question and had prepared an answer that would be both convincing and verifiable. "I can give you the locations of 3 FBI safe houses, the real names and covers of 6 federal agents working on your case, and details about planned surveillance operations for the next 2 weeks." The information Marcus was offering was real, but carefully selected to minimize damage to the federal investigation. Agent Wong had agreed to sacrifice certain operational details in order to maintain Marcus's credibility with Carrera's organization. Carrera leaned forward with obvious interest. "That kind of information would be extremely valuable. What do you want in return?" $5 million and guaranteed safety for my family," Marcus replied. "I know you have the resources, and I know you have the reach to make problems disappear permanently." $5 million is a lot of money," Carrera mused. "How do we know the information is authentic?" Marcus reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be classified FBI documents. In reality, the documents were carefully crafted forgeries created by the FBI's Technical Services Division, but they contained enough accurate information to pass initial scrutiny. As Carrera examined the documents, Marcus activated the hidden transmitter that would signal Agent Wong's team to begin their approach. The plan was for the federal agents to move in once Marcus had obtained recorded evidence of Carrera's criminal admissions. "This is very impressive," Carrera said after reviewing the papers. "But I'm afraid there's been a change in our arrangement, Mr. Thompson. You see, we've learned some disturbing information about your recent activities." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. Something had gone wrong with the plan, and Carrera knew more than he was supposed to. "What kind of information?" Marcus asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Ricci stepped forward with a malicious grin. "We know about your little escape from the federal safe house in Colorado. We know about your contact with Agent Wong. and we know about the FBI team that's currently positioned around this warehouse. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to understand how his plan had been compromised. Either Carrera had much better intelligence sources than anyone realized, or there had been another leak within the FBI investigation. "You're very good, Mr. Thompson," Carrera continued conversationally. "But you're not the only one with military training and tactical expertise. Did you really think we wouldn't be monitoring federal communications and surveillance activities?" The situation had deteriorated rapidly, but Marcus had been in worse positions during his SEAL career. The key to survival was to remain calm, assess available options, and execute decisively when the opportunity presented itself. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we're going to have a very different kind of conversation," Carrera replied. "You're going to tell us everything you know about the federal investigation, real information.